The river flowed through the town without a sound. No rush, no force. Just a steady, silent movement. People crossed it every day, their cars and footsteps carried by bridges that spanned its banks. But nobody ever really stopped to look. The noise, the life of the town, belonged to the busy roads and crowded markets. The river, for all its presence, remained ignored, a silent backdrop to the daily clamor. Daniel grew up right there, near its banks. His house faced the water, and as a child, he'd often sit by the edge after school, just watching. He'd see leaves drift by, carried on the current, without any struggle, moving with an effortless grace. He wasn't learning anything you'd find in a textbook, but something about that quiet observation stayed with him. Just like the river, Daniel was not loud. He never interrupted people. He didn't compete for attention in conversations. In school, this was always seen as a weakness. Teachers would often forget he was even in the room. His classmates would talk right over him, and meetings at work would end without anyone ever hearing his voice. He found a job as a technician in a power station, a place defined by noise. The machines were deafening, and the people, somehow, were even louder. Instructions had to be shouted and repeated. Mistakes were common in the chaos, but in that loud environment, Daniel's quiet nature gave him a different kind of perception. He noticed things that everyone else missed. A subtle vibration in a turbine that just felt wrong. A pressure gauge that hesitated for a fraction of a second before moving. A pattern on a monitor that didn't quite match the data from the day before. He tried to report what he saw. The first time, there was no reaction. He reported it again, pointing to the inconsistencies. Still nothing. The senior staff, the bosses, they trusted confidence. They listened to volume. They were guided by a history of past success, which made them resistant to a quiet voice, suggesting a future problem. They saw his quiet warnings as a lack of conviction. Then one evening, the river swelled. Heavy, relentless rain had been falling for days far upstream. The town, nestled in the valley, had no idea. The warning alarms, which should have blared, stajad silent. The town slept peacefully, oblivious to the growing danger. But at the power station, Daniel was awake. He watched the monitors, his eyes tracking the data. The water levels were rising fast. The pressure on the dam was climbing at an alarming rate. The pattern he'd been worried about was now shifting dramatically, confirming his worst fears. He spoke up, his voice still quiet but firm, trying to cut through the casual noise of the control room. Again, he was ignored. Just another false alarm from the quiet guy. Minutes later, a turbine screamed. It was a high-pitched, metallic shriek of pure strain, the sound of metal under immense, unbearable pressure. The whole system began to overload. Panic erupted. People were shouting, running, unsure what to do, but Daniel moved. Not in a frantic rush, but with a deliberate, precise calm. He knew exactly what was needed. He shut down one critical line, instantly redirecting the flow. Then he moved to a manual release lever, covered in dust, a mechanism that hadn't been used in years. With all his strength, he pulled it. Water surged into the emergency spill channels. The entire dam shuddered. The concrete shook so violently it felt like an earthquake. But it held. The structure endured the immense force that was suddenly unleashed upon it. By morning, the scale of the near disaster was clear. The river had overflowed its banks further down. Fields were flooded, and basements in the lower parts of town were filled with muddy water. But the dam, the heart of the town's infrastructure, had survived. The town was saved from complete catastrophe. An investigation followed, as it always does. They reviewed the reports. They read through the logs, and slowly a picture emerged. Daniel's name kept appearing, again and again. His earlier notes, his ignored warnings, and a detailed log of his actions during the critical moments of the surge. It was all there, in black and white. There was no big celebration for him, no speeches in his honor. Just a quiet, official acknowledgement of his role. The town, in its own stoic way, began to rebuild. The river, its moment of fury past, returned to its path, silent once again. One evening, not long after, Daniel walked along the riverbank. He stood in the same spot he had as a child, watching the same quiet flow, and he understood something, not with pride, but with a deep, peaceful clarity. Noise is what draws attention, but it's silence that carries weight. The river never announced its strength. It just was. It shaped the land over centuries, not with a single shout, but with persistent, unending presence. It endured. Daniel turned and walked home. Tomorrow, work would continue. The machines would be loud, and the voices would rise again in competition, but he would remain what he always was. Observant, consistent, unforced. A quiet man who understood the power of the silent river, which just kept moving. Thanks for watching.